Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Just to say, we're all being filmed this evening, possibly to wind up in another animation by somebody else working for the Barbican or a larger organisation. Not quite sure what's going to go on there. We've all signed the paper, so let's see what happens there. Anyway, huge welcome, of course, to Andrew and Eden. Thank you very much indeed for coming to this screening. A number of key collaborators in the audience, of course. It'd be great to hear from you shortly. A very ongoing collaborative project over many years. Now, Andrew, we'll start with you if we could. Kind of three phases to that programme, I think. We had Donkey Head, Kingdom Batista. Yeah. Really glad that we didn't see the feature-length cut of Kingdom Batista tonight. Always a worry there that will come out, of course. What a creature that was. Continuity, I think, from Kingdom Batista perhaps to some of the head action in Diseased and Disorderly. I'm very glad we didn't see that tonight, of course. But there are three phases, I think. We move from a very, very physical, we have to say, very physical kind of early CGI into a kind of live-action animation mix, manipulated moving image, we could say, and then into the wonderful later films, ending, of course, with the epic Diseased and Disorderly. Extraordinary film that kind of brings many things together. But do you see those phases in the animated work, and do you think of the animated work itself as discrete from or very much part of the larger body of work?
Well, there's certainly a kind of continuity there. But first of all, I think I just want to say thank you to Nag, who was responsible for inviting you. He introduced the program. And we were kind of very particular about trying to make sure there's a chronology. So we started with, as you say, Kingdom Batista and certainly Donkey Head, and moved through. And what struck me, certainly on the big screen, and even Eden as we were watching it, because she kept leaning over, asking questions and flagging up, that certainly Marcia Fakwa, whose voice seemed to permeate the whole program, even before she even arrived on for the last two pieces. But it's this sense that there is a continuity and that there are reoccurring themes, motifs, friends, family that kind of that underpin, that make the work happen, and regardless of whether you're being funded or not, there's always this kind of spillage. So the earlier work, which Donkey Head was always designed as an installation, and there were 4 screens, 4 donkey heads coming at you. It was a really kind of difficult, onslaught. And then Kingdom Batista was cut short. There were the end credit sequences, as you say. There was a longer version that we didn't see this evening. And then I'd kind of forgot that, and then we were moving on. Certainly, we wanted to introduce Eden. So, for instance, those pieces, you liked the bits on the beach, and you liked all the other earlier pieces where Eden was drawing. It was a kind of piss take, a bit out of Jackson Pollock onto the perspex. Do you remember when Ben came and filmed that, Eden? In the studio, the studio which we had at the very end. Yeah. And those kind of moments, you don't understand necessarily the continuity of look back, of hindsight. There are motifs and things that belong. And certainly when Eden was working with Ian, and again when Ian came on screen in the little kind of swan down artifact, you kind of realise that some of the voices there that I was collaging in had already appeared in the earlier work. So as well as the kind of imagistic taking you through chronologically, there are sound bites and the way in which I guess I'm collaging sound. Every now and then, oh gee, he's using that same bit of sound again. But there seemed to be, that seems to then, there's a sonic glue that I think, over the last 15 odd years that I've been working kind of with animation, live action and manipulation. I think sometimes it's that kind of sound image manipulation that it's about reverse engineering. It's about making sense of it when you're in the edit suite. So when Eden and I, you saw at the very end there, that's a studio that we used to share. We just moved to a new one recently. And there are things that kind of are hanging around within that space. And whether they be the magazines that feature in the, the books, or whether they're the paintings that then end up ultimately featuring in the kind of moving image works, there's a real sense of kind of belonging and kind of place for all of them. So those three, I guess, stages you talk about, they kind of spill in and out of each other. So, for instance, at the very end, when you see the CGI of Isabel Skinner, who is a kind of student of mine, she is an amazing, remarkable kind of animator in terms of CGI model making, very crude initially, that moves on to these amazing kind of heads that you see, these telltale heads that we call them. There's, it makes sense to me that suddenly somebody had come into my life that was willing to, they're quite simple in terms of their ambition, but they really belong to the Kingdom Batista, and they really belong to the Donkey Head, and Donkey Head in particular was like a render that used to take about 48 hours or 72 hours to render that stuff, and you'd come back to the edit suite and see whether it had crashed or not. But that sense of continuity is certainly there in those three I guess, phases you talk about. But I'd never look at them as kind of, they're not as phases designed to work like that. They're just spilling in and out of each other.
Exactly, yeah. Oh, of course, I would like to thank Nag enormously and everyone at the Barbican for making this event and the whole festival possible. I was actually in this seat on Thursday, this actual seat on this actual stage with the Palestine Film Festival. So great variety here at the Barbican, and good to be in a place that actually declares itself as a cinema. I was cycling down here earlier on in the rain and the mist and the spit, and past a building that was a cinema and is still a cinema, but you wouldn't know because on the white board outside it said small plates, cocktails, pizza, and nibbles. I mean, I'm not going to name the cinema. I'm sorry, did someone say Curzon Hoxton? I'm not going to name the cinema, but it's good to be in a cinema that supports this kind of work. Really sorry, of course, that Glenn isn't with us. He's got some kind of variant. I think it's changed its name very rapidly, hasn't it? The new one coming towards us. It was called BBC 4 yesterday, I think.
This is the Hastings variant.
It's now called
the Hastings variant.
On and On and On. I think it's the name changed overnight. Really hope he's okay, of course, but he has got major variant action going on in the animation world. Incredible animation from Glenn. Now, I'd like to just give the audience a sense, if we could, of how Glenn came into the process, but also alongside that, give us a flavour of a kind of normal working day in the studio with you and Eden, how it works, how that kind of collaboration works, and then when Glenn came into the mix.
Well, normally what happens in the studio, Eden? What's the first thing you're asking for? Is it food? Yeah, it's definitely a bit of food. Yeah, it's always food, sandwiches and cake in the afternoon. That's very important. Without that, we don't go anywhere. Which then connects with Glenn. We've been down in Hastings now 18 years, but Glenn moved down there maybe 25 years ago. An old friend of Layla's, and then we reconnected, and he worked on a couple of. In fact, he was an extra in Là-Bas, the BBC thing, years and years ago. And he came round to lunch. We reconnected, just after we moved down, and he'd say Eden has these sketchbooks. You saw the sketchbooks in the final piece, and in fact, this is a factotum. These are the ones that are for sale, reduced from £40 to £20 today. And that's the book that she was the film is all within this book. And these drawings that Eden has produced, the collages, she kind of feeds in and out of them. She might be working on these in the studio, or she might be working on bigger collaged drawings or even paintings. But Glenn was there. Did you want to hold that and promote it? Hold it up to the audience as they can see. That's it. And make sure that you say £20 every now and then, okay? Just £20 reduced.
It's very heavy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very heavy. You get for £20, you get a lot of pieces of paper. And he came round for lunch one Sunday, and Eden was busy drawing, and he just asked, in a very kind of humble way, because he's an animator, that's his kind of background. Fine art moved into animation, and he just produced a couple of very simple GIFs, so like 10-second moving drawings that Eden had done, and so I photographed them, emailed them to him, and come Monday morning, they were just these amazing little things. I posted a few of them on the website. And ultimately, they then turned into the Random Acts, the Channel 4. Elisa Marie Russo, who we worked together on Swandown, she saw them, flagged them up, and long story short, we kind of started developing this relationship. So he was then animating the drawings. And so some of the earlier work, certainly the Random Acts piece that we showed this evening, it kind of just grew out of that. But it's a very simple way of working, and it's a shame that Glenn's not here tonight, because Eden and Glenn is a great kind of relationship that has evolved through that. And there's a kind of simplicity, there's a generosity of spirit again, and nothing's too difficult. But there's a simplicity of his kind of animation that really lends itself to the way in which Eden's working, and then I guess the layering then comes through the sound design. And then of course, the more recent piece is the vital elements of Jem Finer's, music, and again the way in which he sends stuff. We chat, but there's no kind of preciousness to that. So I think all of the work today is collagic in its ambition, because I don't work with the storyboard really, and so Eden's always feeding into the process. So, as you know, I have a kind of garden shed within the studio. So Eden's normally out in the main space, and when it gets a bit cold, you'll come in. What do you normally come into the shed asking for? What's that? More food? Yeah, more food. So that kind of sense of there's a kind of inner sanctum where things are happening, but Eden will come in and sit down and maybe bring a drawing that she's just worked on, and it's the immediacy, I guess, of all things digital, that I can photograph a drawing that she's just done, or it's in her book, And I might email that to Glenn, and then within 48 hours, he might have sent back just a 10-second kind of little fiddle. I mean, he calls them fiddlings, and and then they'll go into the mix. And there's no kind of, I'm not directing him necessarily, but he will respond to the drawings or the paintings or the stuff that I'm sending him. And then ultimately, maybe every couple of weeks, he'll come in and look at a kind of an assemble. So he begins to feed into that that stage as well.
No, I mean, it's an incredible body of work, and it really does arrive, in terms of this programme with Diseased and Disorderly, which, must be one of the most distinctive responses to the last period, that anyone could imagine. But this idea of being able to rapid respond, as you say, compared to, the rendering of Kingdom Batista just, 20 years ago, or whatever it might be, is also, of course, exactly how you work in your own live action practice, right? I mean, you're always improvising, adjusting, collaborating, and trying to turn things around in, obviously in an incredibly prolific way. So do you see yourself moving potentially towards a kind of a feature work with Glenn and with Eden? Is there an animation that could, really kind of go to that distance?
I don't think it, actually sitting tonight, with an audience, you realise that the animation, the way in which it's good, it's the shelf life is maybe 8, 10, 12 minutes.
Yeah.
But weirdly, what grew out of Diseased and Disorderly is that we were then approached by the BFI to develop it as a VR kind of project. And so some of these characters now exist within a VR. And in fact, even today, I'm working now with Miles Wiesman, who's kind of a new collaborator who's come into the family, albeit that his wife, Yanni Purton, is part of the family, I was at the Slade with her. So he sent me this, it's just a 20-minute, we enter into the house in the Pyrenees. There's a virtual reality version, and these heads that you've seen in Diseased and Disorderly are beginning to kind of float around saying things, excuse me, can you help me? I'm terribly worried. And they kind of lead you into this kind of locus in the Pyrenees. So rather than being a feature film, and I was very loath. I'm not a big fan of VR. They talk about it being kind of inclusive. It seems very exclusive. Until today, when I was sent this version, and you sit with your Oculus headset on, so you're untethered, and it's been downloaded into the little hard drive, and so you can, physically and metaphorically explore that space. And you could be in there for an hour, 2 hours. So it's kind of longer than a feature length, but it's trying to get my head around the kind of implications, the ramifications of that, as opposed to maybe taking this kind of animation and the 2D and the 3D into a feature-length kind of experience. And it's very time-consuming. I think that's the other thing, is that despite the immediacy with which Glenn and I work, to turn it into a feature film, I think be quite difficult.
No, exactly. But I mean, it's great that you are engaging with VR. Of course, there's an adult version, very rude, for later night viewing, which we won't talk about anymore here. But no, it's really interesting, I think, how Andrew obviously just takes on technologies, and then there's that singular vision at the heart of whichever project and whichever medium you're working in. It'd be great to hear from some of the collaborators in the room, if they would like to make themselves known to us, of course. Marcia and Jem just sitting just near the strange little wall, the low wall, just to potentially defend themselves against any particularly difficult questions that come their way from the front. But anybody else, of course, in the room, would love to hear your thoughts. It's not often, of course, in recent months or even years, increasingly, that we've been able to gather in a cinema space and to see, of course, this incredible programme. So it'd be lovely if people haven't seen the film before to share thoughts with us. Please do feel free to do so. We've got colour-coordinated microphones here. I'm not sure if there's another. There is another.
There's a yellow one. There's a yellow one as well.
So we could actually almost animate the room with just the microphone colours. Anyone would like to kick off? Any thoughts? I mean, please do share them with us. Yeah, gentlemen here. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Right, you talk about the sonic continuity of your films. I was looking at some of those and I'm thinking about the actual visual continuity, because when you're on the beaches, there's...
Put your microphone closer to your mouth.
Okay,
that's it.
Thank you.
Okay. Right, yeah, you were talking about the sonic continuity of your films. I was thinking about the visual continuity, because you're on the beach as the straw man, and that took me back to Gallivant.
Okay.
Quite a few years ago. And also you've got the mention there, the dedication to Dudley Sutton as well. Of course, was in This Filthy Earth and that piece on Juberts you did a fair while back.
Yeah, I know, he was also in Swandown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, one of the other things I saw from the other films was you seem to like to set yourself challenges. So My Dead Dad, you took, you played with Dead Dad around, you set up this wonderful house in the middle of nowhere in France. Is that a continuing thing with both of you? You both like challenges in your film. Do you set yourself challenges in the animation?
Yeah, I think quite often the more recent animations have actually spilled out of the project. So, for instance, when we were working Dog Ate Dog, when I'm in the studio working, I was editing Alec and the Dogs for that particular project, and so Eden is always there when we're in the studio. So the animations quite often, and the drawings and my sketchbooks and notebooks are almost kind of connected to the feature films, the live action stuff, the bigger projects. And so it's this stuff that I call spillage. So it spills out of the bigger project, which is why. So for instance, Gallivant, there's something about when we made that film, we circumnavigated the whole of the UK. It's coastal. When we moved down to St Leonard's and Sea, I think we already had a kind of an affinity with that bit of the world. So it's this thing maybe where the sonic and the imagistic are just connected to our real life. The work is very autobiographical. Everything we've seen tonight is kind of connected with my life, with our lives really, or the bigger projects that I've been working on. So I don't ever see them as being kind of standalone projects. So you're very kind of astute. You've obviously seen the work. So there is this connection. Both the moving image work, the animated work, the sound pieces, and my writing. It's kind of all interconnected. I never feel as if I've finished one project and then I'm moving on to another. That's one of the joys of working with Eden when she's awake, is that. She's always kind of feeding into the projects, which makes me kind of go off in slightly different tangential directions, and yet they're rooted very much in what I'm working on, what we're working on together. Yeah.
Okay, and just a question: are you going to dedicate your next film unfortunately, to Sean Locke?
Sean, will definitely be there, and of course, recently very mindful of Sean and the inspiration and the joy he brought to our lives. So indeed, and if anything, there's things that might yet involve him. This virtual reality project I'm talking about, there's a post of Sean's just when he started out as a comedian, before anybody really knew him, and I've got some really lovely footage from Smart Alec, an outtake. So as you kind of touch this poster, it springs to life, and there's just a kind of 10-second loop of Sean being really obnoxious to camera in between. It's like an outtake, and so he will live on in that project for sure.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Thanks to that gentleman for kicking things off. I think he mentioned 7 works by Andrew there, so I'd like the next question to go 8 or upwards, please. But with different titles, of course. There's many to choose from out there. No, thank you very much indeed, and also for remembering Sean Locke for us as well. I am going to go to Gemma Marcia, I think, because they are indivisible from the later works. If that's okay, Gemma Marcia, just to ask Gem about sound work first of all, what your thoughts are and how you approach the sound world, the sonic realm. That would be great to hear from you on that.
Well,
where to begin?
where to begin? Well, I mean,
Zero G maybe.
It's a great pleasure working with Andrew because he's totally unprescriptive. So I generally just get a feeling of what the film's about and start responding to that and sending things to Andrew via WeTransfer or Dropbox or whatever. It's as simple as that. And a lot of the magic really is down to Andrew. I feel he should take more credit because a lot of it's in the way he layers and weaves things together and manipulates things. But so it's a joy to work with him. Very relaxing process.
But you also play live with him. That's interesting, maybe to other people.
Yeah. I mean that's a thing which hasn't really happened with the animations, but with all the feature films I've worked on with Andrew, so Swan Down onwards, not only have they been films and books, they've also been live performances. So live performances to an edit of the film where Andrew, Ian Sinclair,
David, who's behind us in the audience with some clothes on, which is good.
Kirsten Norrie, Claudia Barton, and we do a live performance. It's more than just a soundtrack. It's more than just recreating a soundtrack. It's a sort of another thing in itself. So
Improvised.
It's a kind of improvised response, mapped out, but there's a lot of improvisation in it. So again, like Andrew was saying, it's like one thing begets another. It's like, it's an ever-evolving process. And then, something like some of these animations I watched tonight, I saw my name and I thought, hang on, what did I do? I wasn't even aware I was involved in this. So, Andrew has this huge archive of stuff because I said to him far too much, and he feels free to plunder into that, which is wonderful. I'm very happy about that.
Thank you very much, Jim. I mean, would you like to just pass the microphone just to your left a little bit, and maybe Marcia, we could just hear your thoughts on your improvisational vocal response. I mean, it's unfathomable to me how you did that.
I wanted to say something, but then I thought better of it. I thought, but it might just amuse some people, or not, that Andrew introduces Jem very seriously as Jem Finer, and I am Marcia Farquhar. Well, actually, my name's Farquhar, or Farquhar, but I always think Andrew sounds very disrespectful to me, and yet, of course, working with him is one of the most mutually respectful and engaging and actually loving processes I've ever known. So I think that's just in addition to something Jem has said. This is very reverb. Does it sound it?
You sound absolutely gorgeous from up
incredibly
here.
clear up here.
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
we're recording you for the next
Yes,
soundtrack, actually.
but that's all I really want to say. And of course, with Eden, who took some time to accept me, but I think accepted me on the occasion of my one-woman Punch and Judy show, and made Andrew watch this one-woman Punch and Judy show 3 times because it was repeated on the hour, every hour at Delaware. And I think he got a bit tired because he said to Jem, who was filming it, "Why don't you put the camera in the back?" So there was this rear view vision, me popping up and down to change hats, and that's the way to do it. And then, of course, we collaborated on a film of that. But it was from that immediacy of the cheek, actually, which is a pun I didn't intend, of suggesting to Jem that he puts the camera, as I say, to film my rear, bobbing up and down. But it was impossible, I think, not to love all this. And that's what I think enough. But I think that's what we would probably both agree and often speak about. I mean, I cheered myself up the other day to watch a little film I took of Andrew speaking in sort of cod Spanish to Bonzo the dog, our dog. I was feeling terribly depressed, and I thought, I know, I'll watch this little film, like, where he's rude to Jem, says, get out of the frame, and and it still lasts about 1 minute, but it's marvelous, marvelously uplifting. And that's a bit like the process of working with Eden and Andrew, and I have to say with Layla, because there's always Layla, even if she isn't as she isn't right now on the stage, this equally brilliant third part of this extraordinary holy and unholy trinity. That's enough, I think.
That's
I
incredible,
couldn't
Marcia.
think of starting.
We
Now I
rehearsed that
can't
earlier.
start.
And you almost got that
Take it
verbatim.
away.
You got that right. Thank you,
We've
Marcia.
got a double gin
Yeah.
and tonic coming for that. Thank you so much for that. We are going to, I think, unfortunately, have to close. But with what? No, Marcia, we cannot top such words. I would just like to draw attention to something that Jem said before we do close. He mentioned Dropbox and WeTransfer. Of course, other transfer platforms are available. And we would not like, of course, to bias ourselves in any way towards just those 2 platforms. Jem, of course, did mention that the quality of the manipulation, of course, of much of the work being credited to Andrew. Of course, one of Andrew's great manipulative skills is to manipulate his collaborators, of course, on a daily basis towards such nefarious ends as we've just seen over the last 75 minutes or so. But incredible, to second Marcia's words, as a wonderful way to finish, I think. We have, of course, Andrew Eden and Layla. Now, merch is available. Let's not forget that. Now, I'm wearing actually vintage Layla Macmillan. This is not for sale tonight, but many books and wonderful assortment of goodies are. Marcy is holding something up. I'm not quite sure what that is.
That's a bit of merch, isn't it?
There's some merch there.
There's some more merch here.
So there's a big suitcase out there.
Large T-shirts. You've got a variety of these.
So we're not joking when we say merch is available. It's in the big case outside. Please do
And we've
stop by
got a
the store.
suitcase in the boot of the car. But
and
before
we've
you round up, Eden would like to say something as well.
Yeah.
She is. She's up here suffering us both.
Eden,
and
thank
the
you so
audience.
much. Yeah, please. Yeah, thank you.
All right, Eden, what would you like to say? She said, "Thank you for the film. Coming to see the film. This is a really
Great work. Sign. Thank you very
so
much for coming to see
our
the films. And thank you very much indeed, obviously, to Eden, Andrew, and Layla, to NAG, the Animation Festival, everyone at the Barbican. Please do enjoy the rest of the evening, but not before you've stopped at the merch stall. Thank you very much indeed for coming. Thanks a lot.